The year is 1610, and Galileo Galilei is about to announce his greatest discovery. While observing the moons of Jupiter and the faces of Venus with his telescope, Galileo realized that the heliocentric model proposed by Nicolaus Copernicus years earlier was in fact correct. Galileo presented his evidence to the world in his book, Siderus Nuncius, Latin for the sidereal messenger. Now, let's imagine a hypothetical scenario where YouTube was a thing in 1610. And instead of presenting his arguments in a book, Galileo decided to present them in a video format. Now, Galileo's video went viral, became a scandal and massively downvoted, and some even flagged it as inappropriate. Many people made video responses accusing him of being a herod and a complete idiot, including the Pope of Rome himself. Now you would imagine that the overwhelming rejection of Galileo's work would be evidence of his mistake, that the marketplace of ideas rooted out his flawed reasoning. And with 99% of the people rejecting Galileo's argument, it seems safe to say that his heliocentric model was completely nonsense. But was it really? Was the fact that Galileo's ideas contradicted common sense and were completely rejected by the populace and even authorities and even scientists at the time any evidence that Galileo was wrong? The merit of any argument should never be evaluated by popularity or by how many people it reaches. The quality of an argument should always be evaluated by its capacity to logically explain the empirical evidence. Now, challenging ideas tend to be unpopular, at least in the beginning. It usually takes time for people to grasp new concepts and new ideas, and that has a lot to do with how our brains work. Complex narratives and complex arguments need to be contemplated and measured carefully before truly understood. Heliocentrism wasn't the first idea that was strongly rejected at first. That happened to Darwin's theory of evolution, to Einstein's theory of relativity. The whole thing about the internet that is a little bit different than before is because as an intellectual technology, it changes the way we think about information, and most importantly, it changes the way we acquire new information. And the main basis for this video is a book called The Shallows, was written by Nicholas Carr. It's a great book, by the way. Link is on the description to the Amazon store. You should really check it out. His argument relies heavily on research and studies by psychiatrists and mostly from neuroscientists. And the main thing about the internet that he talks in his book is how we are constantly bombarded by different signals. That doesn't really allow our brains to really concentrate and contemplate narratives and arguments. And that is why it's so difficult to read a book these days. It's so difficult to meditate and not get distracted about all this from all this constant noise that we are always being fed from the internet and our electronic devices. The way our brains constructs knowledge is by getting all these scattered bits and pieces of information and organizing them, and then putting them together in a logical sequence in a way that we can understand it, and then we can later consult and check and through our memory. So this process is very important, and this process is getting more and more neglected by the way we approach new information and the way we approach knowledge. You can make a comparison, an analogy here between our brains and computers' brains, between processing units of a computer. We have RAM memory, we have working memory. Our brains had memory that is that we use for mundane activities, and we also have a hard drive, where we store this more important memory. And the way memory goes from working memory to this, let's say, storage memory is through contemplation and memorization. With our constantly reliance on internet for information, we are not really giving time for our brains to do it, and we are not recurring to our memories. That makes our brain more specialized in this type of cognitive skills. So in some ways our IQs are rising, but in other ways IQs are dropping when it comes to other kinds of activities, especially when it comes to memory and attention span and literacy capacity. And there has been a study released this year by a Norwegian researcher saying that the IQ scores have been dropping quite consistently, and the Flynn effect is reversing. And according to his study, environmental causes, especially, not especially, but certainly use of internet is one of them. And this is not only affecting lay people, but is also affecting researchers. James Evans wrote an article for Science magazine where he mentions how the transmutation from from paper to digital has been narrowing research. Now we have the idea that we have all the knowledge of the world at the palm of our hands, but this is an illusion. The internet has all the knowledge. We don't.
We will ask Dr. No. There is nothing he doesn't.
We very rarely stop to think about how this really works. How do the search engine, how do Google, DuckDuckGo will measure what kind of content is going to be fed to me? Search engines work in a very similar way that the news network or the radio station and the newspaper or the town crier before it used to do. They are feeding you the information that they select. So they are, in a way, not only filterers of content, but also censors of content.
Your filter bubble is kind of your own personal, unique universe of information that you live in online. And what's in your filter bubble depends on who you are, and it depends on what you do. But the thing is that you don't decide what gets in. And more importantly, you don't actually see what gets edited out.
No. 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 No.
I think that needs to be criticized about let's say Google, for example, it's how the advert thing works, because Google is always pushing for adverts and social media is always pushing for adverts. So one thing that becomes a very important element of content filtering is the capacity to make money, because all these companies are interested in popularity, in clicks, because that's where the money comes from. This corrupts the whole system of content filtering. We shouldn't really trust as blindly as we do. And here is my big criticism to this system, because the algorithm is a very strict set of equations. And what computers can do, and I would even argue that all computers will ever be able to do, is count numbers.
Oh, what an awful dream! Ones and zeros everywhere!
So the measurement of quality that a search engine has is always quantitative. Search engines, the way that the brain of a search engine works is different than the way we do. We make the analogy of our brains and computers as brains, and I even made this analogy early in the video, but this only works as an analogy. The way our brains think is much different than the way a computer thinks. It's much less strict, it's much more fluid, And of course, it is organically through electrical and chemical reactions. And more than that, our brains has an incredible adaptability, which is called neuroplasticity. We have a much more subjective approach to information that a computer doesn't. So what a search engine does, what an algorithm does, is simply count numbers. So a computer, a search engine, doesn't have the same qualitative filter that we do. When you learn how search engines work, how Google, for example, works, you'll see that all they do is count numbers. So content with more words, with more hyperlinks, with more citations, and with more people who spend time reading it, the average time people spend on a web page, the content that gets more clicks, these are going to be the measurements for the search engine to push for that content and put it in the first page. But as I said in the introduction of this video, how many people an argument reaches, how many people like that, are not measurements for quality. And I think it's a very important reason why our literacy is declining, or our IQ is starting to decline as well, because we are less and less spending time with building our own knowledge and understanding of the world and understanding of the information that we get. So this is something that, in my opinion, makes us stupid. And I think the way social media works now with the Web 2.0 is a very contributor to that, and I think enhances the problem. We are much less open to the idea of having discussions, of having honest discussions with people. And I think social media, the way you can easily block people and you can only accept people who agree with you, and you treat your little web page as your kingdom, and this kind of thinking not only creates confirmation bias, but I think also helps with the Dunning-Kruger effect, because we usually have opinions about things that we don't really know very much. We usually have strong opinions about things that we barely understand. And one thing that I see quite often, for example, is people who never read, let's say, a textbook in climatology and think they can debunk climate science.
Global warming and that, a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay? It's a hoax.
You have to understand that people who are working with climatology, who are getting funding to doing that, I'm just using climatology as an example, they spend years studying this stuff. They know what they're doing, and climatology has been a very good science for many years. You can date climatology back to the ancient Greeks. So this is a body of knowledge that has been built over many years. And what I'm saying about climatology applies to everything. Applies to history, applies to biology, applies to philosophy, to logic, to everything. You're not going to be reading a couple of Wikipedia pages and a couple of documentaries on YouTube with some very shady sources, and that's going to make you an expert, and you're going to debunk hundreds of years of scientific research. Doesn't work like that. Knowledge takes time, takes effort, takes discipline, and takes a lot of thinking. People believe in any evidence that satisfies their personal inclinations. So let's say you have a common sense belief on something, or everyone has their pre-established ideas of what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false. And when you only search for things that confirm that, you are not really doing any research. You are not really challenging yourself. And I think challenging yourself is a big important part of knowledge.
Well, I say there are some things we don't want to know. Important things.
Yes! There is a trend, I think, in sort of anti-intellectuality and anti-eruditism and anti-science.
Science as a whole is a product of Western modernity, and the whole thing should be scratched off.
Since we are so lost in what is true, what is false these days, and becoming, in my opinion, more and more gullible and more tribal in the way we think about things, that we can accept people who are not only pretending to be stupid, but are actually stupid, occupying positions of power.
Well, not only am I ready, but willing and able to serve as vice president.
What I think is, if we lose our capacity for contemplation, if we lose our capacity for deep thinking and critical thinking, there will be really no place for us anymore. Because when it comes to other cognitive skills, machines will, and in some ways already are, surpassing us. We will become obsolete. And this is something that concerns me a lot. Because I don't want humans to disappear. I like our species. We may be flawed, we make fuck ups sometimes, but I don't want us to go away. I don't want us to be replaced by robots. Well, thank you for staying with me until the end. I know that most people stopped watching it a long time ago, so thank you for that. And if you liked this video, please help me sharing it. If you didn't like the video, write a comment, tell me what is your problem with it, what do you think I made a mistake, etc. And if you like my content, if you like this video and you want to subscribe to my channel, that would be greatly appreciated. I am Michel. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time. Cheers.